I'm Matt Cotter, and presenting with me today is Mayeda and Catriona Chalmers. We're going to probably try and talk for about 30 minutes and give ourselves about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So we kind of want more time at the end so that you can ask what you want to ask, and instead of us trying to guess what you want to know about the books. So yeah, you can find the book. We'll talk a little bit more about where you can find the books near the end of the presentation, but at the moment they're on Nellie's English Books Japan for the paper versions. Also with the e-reading versions, it's just been put up on X-Reading, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and also they're on all of the main Amazon sites as Kindle versions. Okay, so yeah, the main themes today are the why, the what, and the how. So Anne's going to start us off with the why.
Okay, hello everybody. Yes, we wanted to keep it simple: why, what, and how, and I'm doing the why. And so why global issues and extensive reading? Well, why global issues, period? They're important. They are important. And our question was, how do we get them out there? Okay. And so how did this all happen? Basically with my friendship with this woman on the right, Catriona, who will be speaking next. The genesis came out of many conversations, discussions that she and I had about the lack of awareness amongst our students, our learners, about these issues. In particular, our conversation started with human trafficking, sex trafficking more specifically. And then when we were in Nepal, we had a bit of a chance encounter with the woman in this photo in the middle. Her name is Charamaya Tamang, and her story and her organization, Shakti Samuha, about herself being trafficked, but all of the women that she supports through her organization that have been trafficked in the past. The stories that we heard were just, I want to say amazing and horrendous, but they needed to be told. So we tossed around, Catriona and I tossed around many ideas, maybe a textbook, but how do we do this? Okay, how are we going to tell these stories that need to be heard? So why not graded readers, basically? Why not graded readers? Because actually this is what we have available on the current global issues market in graded readers. Okay, let's take a look, all right? So we have books like this, which are good to a point. Of course, extensive reading means self-selected for most people. And very few of my learners actually choose these books because, well, they're good, but maybe they're not so fun to read or interesting for extensive reading. Okay. Nonfiction. We also have a lot of nonfiction graded readers, right, like these. Or very low level ones like these, okay? And which are actually geared for young learners and not necessarily ESL, or EFL learners, but maybe emergent learners in their L1, okay? But we have all of these books in my university library. We have all of these because these seem to be more accessible in terms of level for our students. Or we also have these as well, which are similar. They're really good books, but we kind of wanted meatier stuff and maybe for content that was more for young adults, high school, university students. Okay. I think these are quite good for young adults. We have my students actually choose these for nonfiction, this series, not for nonfiction, more so than the other ones that I just showed you. Okay, we have a bit more readership with this series, but still, given that I order many of the books, most of the physical books at our university based on our readership, based on what students are checking out. in our extensive reading library. These books get checked out a bit more, but the other ones, some are just 0. Okay, so there was still something missing, and it was the stories. I think it was the stories and narratives. Okay, what are students? And I work at a women's university in Kobe. And this is the profile of our students. So not everybody, but the profile of our students and what they are actually reading are a lot of the Disney series, fairy tales. They like the easy chapter books like the Magic Treehouse series, those types of easy chapter books. And the common denominator, they have a strong, relatively strong narrative. They want stories, not really nonfiction. Okay, which many of the readers are. Okay, I have to say that there are some very good books in the graded reader world that touches on issues that global issues themes. The Rabbit Proof Fence is good, I think. It's at level 3, L3 in Oxford, in the Oxford Bookworm series. But this level 3 is actually pretty difficult for our students, for my students at least at our university. Okay, it's a little bit difficult for them to get through. I think JoJo's Story, it's an L2, and this is Cambridge, which is accessible, I would say. And I think it's one of the best books out there that touches on these types of issues. But this is really, I was thinking about this while we were putting this presentation together, and this was really the only one that I could really think of that really was accessible for our students. Maybe others have more. So my learners, they need narratives at the lower level. There are just not enough books in this genre at that level. And this was the gap that we were wanting to fill. Okay, easier access in terms of vocabulary load and complexity, and we wanted to provide autonomy for the learners to choose what they want to read. Okay, and this key word was accessibility at the right level. Okay, because we wanted to provide a way into the topic that was more amenable for the learners. And that's my bit. So now I'll turn you over to Catriona on the what.
Hi, yes, I'm Trina, and I'll be talking to you about the what of this little shindig. So the what, yes, we know we need to write a book, and we know we need to write a story. But how do we write a story that covers the depth and the complexity of this issue in a way that is accessible to our students, to the readers? And so after much discussion, we hit upon the idea of a multi-strand narrative. Okay. Okay, so here we are, trafficked. I think you can't see me, but I have the book in my nervously hot, sweaty hand here. And so trafficked, we've got 3 self-contained stories that offer a different lens to the subject of trafficking. Each story is 3,000 words. It's written at the 600 head word level. The stories are Taken, Mission, and Haven. Taken is Anya's story, a young girl who is duped into a sex trafficking ring. Mission is Magda's story, and Magda is Anya's mother, and she goes looking for her daughter. And really, Magda represents the kind of naivety that, like Anne also mentioned about the students, like through the opening of Magda's eyes to this topic, the reader's eyes are opened. Magda has never heard of human trafficking. She cannot conceive of a world in which girls are bought and sold in this way. Haven is Ruth's story. Ruth is an anti-trafficking aid worker. She really represents all of the agencies that are working to end human trafficking and to bring perpetrators to justice, and also to really mop up the damage in the aftermath of all of these events that happen. As I said, the stories are self-contained, but the stories converge, they are intertwined, and that is why we call them braided readers. The characters interact, have conversations through different times and spaces. We can read the same conversation at different points in the conversation through each different story. We thought that these three lenses offer a much broader, a much deeper and fully fleshed out account of the topic. And also with the three different stories, we also thought later on that there are other characters. We could look at the circumstances that brought the other characters into the story. For example, we have our bad guy, Konstantin Maciek. He is the trafficking kingpin. We presume he didn't, he wasn't at kindergarten putting, I want to be a trafficking kingpin on his little Tanabata wish. What are the circumstances and the conditions that brought him to be doing what he's doing? So it's kind of leaves a lot of scope for looking at everybody's back issue and further broadening the topic. So yeah, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so here we go. So we talked about the issue at different conferences, mostly JALT conferences, the Extensive Reading World Conference. We talked with other educators, etc. And at the Extensive Reading World Conference in Taiwan in 2019, we did a workshop. And after we dealt with the stories, we invited attendees to pick a global issue and look at some of the root causes of these issues. And we did have quite a lot of attendees. We had a lot of groups. And what we noticed was these core roots and causes were kind of across the board, regardless of what issue they'd chosen to focus on. So these are the things that are causing all of these issues that we the topics that we want to be bringing into the classroom: poverty, power, education, gender, environment, culture. These are just some of them. There were some more, but these kind of boil down to the core issues, which we realized fed into the Sustainable Development Goals, which we're seeing the introduction of these into the national curriculum. More and more teachers are willing to and able to teach these topics in their classrooms. So that left us, next question, we need a publisher. So from the beginning, we really did want to get on board with ABAX Japan. We wanted to work with the Messrs. Graham Ma. We started off, we spoke to / stalked Hugh Graham Ma in Dubai. This led to a sit-down meeting with Alistair Graham Ma at Shizuoka JALT, which I think was in 2016. So this has been going on for quite a while. And when we sat down with Al, he was interested in the stories and in agreement that it's an important issue and we do need to get it to the students. But one of his concerns as a publisher, as somebody who needs to sell these books to high schools in Japan, was what he termed a below the belt topic, that would be problematic in getting high schools to take the story on board. We talked to lots of other people, kind of pretty much talked to anybody we could pin down, and publishers, booksellers. They all told us about this rule for topics that we can't take to our students. And this is the parsnips rule. We can't take the topics of politics, alcohol, religion, sex, narcotics, any isms or pork to the students. And so, well, Anne and I talked about this a lot, and we are both really, really familiar with what is available on the graded reader market. We know which books are on shelves up and down the country. And virtually every major publisher has the classics in their lineup at some level. And these books are all over the shelves of all the libraries. So when we look at it and you think, okay, we can't do politics, but what about A Tale of Two Cities? Alcohol, David Copperfield. David Copperfield is flagons and flagons of wine consumed on that boat. Religion, The Merchant of Venice. Sex, Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Wuthering Heights, narcotics, Romeo and Juliet. The isms, any Thomas Hardy, any Charles Dickens. And then pork. Couldn't find pork. Don't know what to do about pork. But when I was thinking about it this morning, I thought that if we take all of those books away, we're going to be left basically with the YL stories such as Heidi and The Secret Garden. The Secret Garden is set in Yorkshire, so I'm 100% certain that Mary Lennox had bacon and eggs for breakfast. So, so where does that take us? Okay. We decide to ignore the parsnips rule. We get on board with Al and the stories, and Al quite rightly says, one story does not a series make. So we have to go out and write another book. Okay, so our next book was mine. Again, 3,000 words per story, 600 headword level, 3 perspectives. And this is a story about child labor and cobalt mining in the Congo. So now we have 2 books. And then we were very fortunate that the lovely Matt Cotter entered our crazy world, and we're going to turn over to him now, and he's going to tell us about his lovely book.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the how the ideas have kind of turned into a reality. And I first even kind of thought about even writing a narrative when I ran into Alistair at a PAN-SIG, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And I was presenting on a Māori class that I do up here in Sapporo, and the effects of teaching that class. And he said, oh, maybe you should write something about Indigenous for, I'll put you in touch with Trina and Anne. They're doing a global issues narratives series. So that's when I first got the idea to give it a crack, because I've never written a narrative before. So the 3 things I'm going to talk about is my personal connection to the stories themselves, and the process that went on with the writing and editing and leveling and getting to the published stage. Yeah, so my personal connection is I'm Māori myself from New Zealand. So my great grandmother, you can see up on the left there, she was Māori, and she married an Irish immigrant. So if we're going to put a kind of a fraction on it, I'm an 8th Māori. Me and my brothers there, we're all an 8th Māori. And so I myself have kind of struggled a little bit with my Māori identity growing up. So I thought that if I could bring a story out that others could read, that might help in finding their own ethnic identities, or being proud of, or even just sort of being comfortable with their ethnic identity, then I think that would be very worthwhile to do. But I think, well, my stories are based around Māori stories, but I think it's a kind of a story that can be taken right across the globe in all different Indigenous situations, as it were. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So I was brought up in the very small town of Invercargill at the bottom of New Zealand. Yes, people always look at this slide and they say, why is New Zealand on its side? Yes, New Zealand is more vertical, but this is how I like to put these labels in. But my Māori roots are from the North Island, the west coast of the North Island. And so I was brought up very far away from my Māori roots. So I was brought up very Pākehā, which is a New Zealand word or a Māori word meaning non-Māori. So I didn't know anything about my Māori roots, really, just where my tribes were from. I couldn't speak Māori, didn't learn anything about Māori culture. My hometown has very few Māori, so we didn't learn much about Māori at school either. And that's all part of colonization, which I'll talk about soon. My dad was part of the kind of lost language generation as well. So actually, I haven't told many people this, but the first story that I'll talk about later is kind of loosely based on my father's early life. Anyway, the next slide. Oh, thank you. And is just looking at the losses that Māori faced due to colonization, mainly stemming from just a whole influx of Europeans landing in New Zealand and colonizing New Zealand and taking the land, discrimination. And from all of that, mainly, well, not mainly, but a majority of the reason would be due to land loss, home loss, being, urbanization, taken away from homes and Māori roots. So with that comes all the language loss, the culture loss, political, economical resources, spiritual loss, pride loss, etc. And probably it all boils down to one big thing, which is identity loss. So basically, Māori people were thinking, well, who are we? We have brown faces. We're being discriminated against. People are calling us Māori, but we can't speak Māori. We know nothing about Māori culture. So we're not Pākehā. We're not English. We're not European, but we feel we're not really Māori either. So due to this, there are a lot of other problems. If we go to the next slide, please, a lot of problems that have stemmed from that is from colonization is low socioeconomic status, which leads to, as we know, crime, alcoholism, drugs, domestic violence, with the crime, New Zealand still has a very high percentage of the people in prisons being Māori, very disproportionate there. So yeah, I think with these types of problems and effects of colonization, a lot of Māori growing up over years, centuries, have probably been thinking, should I affiliate myself with my Māori identity? It might cause me to be looked upon as a failure, or it might disadvantage me in somehow. Maybe I should keep quiet about having any Māori roots or any Māori blood, as it were, at all. So if we go to the next slide, this is the story that I really wanted to share and to talk about. And even with myself, when I was growing up, I was like, well, maybe I should not tell people that I'm Māori. Might be better for me in the long run. So let's have a look at the stories themselves. Identity follows three main characters who are, well, actually, we'll go straight to the next slide. Time-wise, might be better. Go straight to the next slide. Thanks. Yeah, so three main characters. The first one is Tama, who's a boy who knows he is Māori, but doesn't know much about about what it means to be Māori. And he's trying to connect with his Māori roots. The second story is about Kylie, who discovers a shocking family secret, and she's trying to deal with that and all of the effects of her family and friends as well when she finds out about the secret. And I'm not going to spoil any of it. You have to go out and get the book. I'm really building it up now. So Pride is about Hone, who didn't think he could become a school teacher, but I'll do a little bit of a spoiler there. He becomes a school teacher, and he's quite connected with his Māori spirituality, but he sees a lot of children and students in the school who aren't, and he's trying to trying to help them connect. Okay, and then again, these stories are all stories by themselves, so you can read them by themselves, and they end within themselves, but they're all connected as well. So the characters make contact with each other within their stories as well. Okay, so writing. I pretty much I had this idea of what I wanted to write, so I just wrote it all, put it all down on paper. Didn't think about leveling, didn't think about word length. I just wrote, and then it was a really big learning process for me, because we went back and forth with versions between Anne and Trina and myself many times. I won't say hundreds, but it must be getting close to there. And the main comment was like, Matt, this is all great information, but put it into dialogue. It's getting boring when you're just writing all this stuff down. So there needs to be dialogue for characters to form relationships with each other and that sort of thing. So as you can see in the comments, we kind of kept it quite fun. There's a lot of banter going on in the comments there. But I think also for me, being a learning process for writing a narrative, it was also a big learning process for Anne and Trina as well. Not only just learning about Māori vocab and cultural ethos, and even just the situation in New Zealand regarding biculturalism and now multiculturalism. So I think that was a big learning curve for Trina and Anne too. Trina, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Or
yeah, sure. So in terms of working with you on identity, absolutely, we learned so much about Maori culture, really so much I had no idea of. I think pretty much my knowledge of Maori was whale rider. So it was a real eye-opener for us to work with you and to learn so much. And I remember that there were certain things where, like, I would cut something and you would come back and say, we can't cut that. Like, for example, the mountains are really important to Maori people. Didn't know that. So then we put our heads together how we could keep that idea in, how we could re-level it and make sure that we were representing the story that you wanted to tell. Aside from working directly with you, Anne and I had both worked with other writers and other editors on other projects, but this was from the ground up, something we were trying to develop. So we did, it was a very steep learning curve for Anne and I. We went back and forth on lots of things, and with Al as well. We were constantly working with Al and rejigging things and rethinking things. And I think that we all learned so much about the process. We learned so much about writing, leveling, graded readers, education. We learned a lot about ourselves and each other, and how Anne and I have very, very, very different working styles. And we really had to find a way to accommodate both and make those compatible without punching each other. And we did that, and I'm very grateful for that.
yeah, so thank you. All right, next slide. So yeah, so after all of this, the leveling was going on, which took a long time, obviously. We had to get under a certain amount of head words and trying to keep the difficulty level down. We started talking illustrations. So we used Alistair used the same illustrator for all of the books. And I kind of like made mock-ups of what kind of illustrations I was thinking about for the stories. And Alistair got those mock-ups to the illustrator, and the illustrator came back with some really great illustrations. And then we were like trying to target places where there might be inconsistencies with the illustration and the stories. Trina and Anne were really good at picking those up, which was great. And then after all of that, went back and forth quite a few times, we get to the finished product. So these are the books. And I think they look quite lovely. And if we go on to the next slide, where can we get them? So as I said before, they're on English Books, Nellie's, Amazon, and X Reading. And also, Alistair might want to talk about this later in the Q&A, but there's at ABAX Digital, there's actually an LMS that's part of that as well. So the students get a little, in the back of the book, there's a little digital access code. Don't know if you can see that from my virtual screen, making the invisible man, but in the back of the book, there's a digital book access code, and they can log into the LMS and do quizzes and questions and things on there that are related to the stories. And if we look at X Reading, and hi, Paul's here, you might want to talk about this later too in Q&A. Paul has been working around the clock to get these stories onto X Reading. I bow to you, and it must have been very hard with a lot of the people working on it being in India, and they've got a lot of bigger problems to worry about at the moment over there. So thank you very much for getting them up on X Reading. You can see, like for example, mine here on the screen has been separated into the 3 different stories to keep them a shorter duration for students to read. And I think that would work really well, because they might read one, they say, oh, I really like that story. Oh, there's 2 more stories. Well, oh, that's about this other person who was in the story. Oh, I might read that one too. So I think that'll work really well. Okay, next slide. We have 2 more books that will be added to this series at some stage. Plastic pollution, and Sherpas are coming along. I'm working on plastics at the moment, and Trina are working on Sherpas, but we do need more stories. So if anyone out there has the inkling of writing a narrative about a global issue, and there's some topics on there, but we're kind of open to other topics as well. If you get in touch with Trina and Al as well about what might be a suitable topic. I hope that some of you have a passion out there for a topic like I had for the ethnic identity Māori stories, then then we can always looking for additions to the series. So yeah, I think that's about us. If we go to the last slide, so Q&A time. I think if anyone has any questions they would like to ask about the stories themselves, the process, and from the idea to getting them published, then now is your time.